and it's called Time to Take Stock. And you may wonder why, in these unprecedented times, we would want to start a new series about taking stock of where we are in life. Well, a survey featured on the BBC website this very week reported that only 9% of people wanted life to go back to the way it was before this pandemic hit. 54% of people wanted to change something about their own lives. And I think, one of the things that we are the thing we're going to look at today is talking about time and rest. And I wonder, as we're going through, why don't you comment? If you had more time on your hands, what would you do with it? Maybe write it in the comments there for us so that we can engage with you. And but what if you had more time? What would you do? So we're going to look at that time and rest and how that works together. And I have some questions for you. And do you ever feel overwhelmed? Do you ever get grumpy? I tell you, Ruth's probably nodding right now that I get grumpy occasionally. Do you ever feel pressurized, either pressurized by your boss or by a family member or just pressurized by yourself? Do you feel like you are always on the go, running from one thing to another thing to another thing? Do you ever think, how am I going to get all this done? Do you feel tired more often than not? I am guessing that if you've answered honestly this morning, you have felt at least one of those emotions in your lifetime. Some of you may have already felt all of them today, at various moments in your life, especially perhaps if you've got young kids. You will have probably felt a lot of those emotions already. And if you have felt one of those emotions at any time in your life, I'm going to throw a radical thought at you right now this morning. You need to stop. You need to stop. Stop what? I hear you probably shouting back. I haven't got time to stop anything. My life is too hectic. There's nothing I can stop doing. I want you to stop being a human doing and become a human being. We're going to look at some biblical context to this in a moment. But we have fallen into a trap laid by the world that says being a doer, being a busy person is a good thing. One of the great things about this time off we've had, not time off, sorry, but this time enforced at home and the kids being off, is that I have now got a set department for the church. It's called Grace. She loves art. And I said to her, I need a badge that says, I am a busy person. And we've fallen into this trap of thinking that being busy is a good thing. You see, time is the one thing that everybody has the same amount of. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, if you live in Staffordshire or South Africa, everyone has 1,440 minutes in a day. That balance is the same for everybody. But we seem to love to fill our days with activity. Perhaps when you're at work, the boss says, how are you doing? Most people hopefully would say, I'm doing good, but then they think, I've got to justify, but I'm really busy. Busyness has become part of being seen to be important. Society seems to value people who are busy. Busyness is worn as that badge of honor. Our identity is becoming wrapped up in how busy we are at work, how indispensable we are. The pace of life is increasing at a scary, scary rate. Some of you will remember a time before email. I do. My kids don't. They don't remember a time before the internet, before mobile phones. I didn't have those things when we were growing up. Some of you remember a time that when you were conducting business, it was done by letter. Can you imagine you would write a response, send it, and wait a few days to hear back? Email, texting, video calling has made things immediate, more driven, more pressurized. But that isn't what we see modeled for us in the Bible. We're going to start by looking at Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3. And this is just a point in the Bible where it's the narrative of how God created the world. And it says in verse 2 of chapter 2, and on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. The creator of the universe modeled rest. 6 days God worked for. He created the universe, created the earth, and rested on the seventh day. If rest is good enough for God, it's got to be good enough for us. And I want to caveat this right now, because I can think of one person who's probably screaming at me in the comments right now that, Adam, you don't rest. And that person is right. This is an area I've been challenged on this week as I've read up and thought about it, that I need to rest. So as I continue, I'm sharing with you as much as I'm preaching to myself. Let's have a look at some other verses. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 12 to 14, I forgot to say that all these verses, these two chunks of verses we've taken so far are in the Old Testament. This is pre-Jesus being born. And in Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 to 14 says the following. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or your sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. This instruction, these verses, formed part of the 10 Commandments. The Jews were told to follow it. Moses shared the 10 Commandments with them, brought them down from the mountain. And this was one of those commandments. Observe the Sabbath day. Many Jews to this day still follow the rule of taking a Sabbath day. The word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbath, meaning rest. Their Sabbath day starts at nightfall on a Friday, finishing at Saturday nightfall. And so there are some parts of cities like London where there's a heavy Jewish population where many of the shops will be shut on their Sabbath day. But you may be sitting there, maybe you've been a Christian for a while, and you'll be saying, well, we have the Old Testament instruction regarding the Sabbath, but surely that does not apply now. After all, this instruction was given pre-Jesus, pre the New Testament. And I agree. We are not living under the law as the Jews were, but we should still be guided by its biblical principles. Many Christians who say they do not have a Sabbath day because it's part of the law and we're not legalistic, keep the other 9 commandments. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, etc. These are good, solid biblical principles, biblical laws, rules. But they're happy to abandon the principle of having a day of rest. It was in the same list of 10. We'll keep the ones that are, we can get on side with not murdering. We don't want to murder people. But when it comes to that challenge to have a day of rest, a Sabbath, we want to disregard it. So why do we abandon the principle of having a day of rest? Well, we've fallen into that trap. Remember, our identity gets sucked into how busy we are. Busyness is worn as that badge of honor. The enemy knows, and we are in a spiritual battle, let's not forget that. The enemy knows that if we can be distracted, then lots of other things will start to fall apart. We get distracted from our families. We become distant from our families. Our kids, our partners don't see us. We get distracted from our finances. We don't pay attention to what's going on there. We get distracted from from God. We get distant and distracted from God. We fill our days up with busyness and we forget. And we don't look to God. You see, the primary aim, I believe, of busyness and how the enemy uses it is to stop us keeping focused on Jesus. There is a word that we have taken out of our dictionary, our personal dictionary. A word that we're going to come back to every week as we go through this series. And that word is margin. We are maxed out and stressed out. We are maxed out on our finances. There's no margin there. We are maxed out on our time. We are maxed out on everything. And it's stressing us out. And I want to be honest and say, I don't think the church, and I mean that as Living Springs and the wider church, has always helped there. We fill the weeks with different courses and meetings, not allowing people any time. There's something on. And that has to stop. As I said earlier, a Sabbath day is something I have struggled with. It's a biblical principle that I need to practice myself as much as I'm asking you to practice it. In Mark 2, verse 27, part B, the second half of the verse should come up on the screen. It says, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." It's a gift to us. Well, a day of rest. It doesn't mean a day of laying in bed, but it means a day of not working, of just taking time out to relax, to build margin into our lives. What does a Sabbath day look like? It looks like that day of rest, a day of switching off work emails. Perhaps of not checking social media. It's fluid. You know what you need to surrender, what you need to stop doing. A day of rest should involve enjoying God's creation, going for a walk, admiring what is around, spending time with God, spending time with family, relaxing and resting. Peter Scazzaro says a Sabbath day should incorporate 4 things: stopping, resting, delight, and contemplation. So what is it going to take for us to follow this biblical principle of rest? Well, it's going to take some deliberate actions, which may seem completely at odds with what I've just said. But we're going to need to get organised. We are going to need to say no to some things, not to fill our diaries. We're going to have to cut down on some of our commitments. We're going to have to plan to do all our jobs during the 6 days, to finish our work. I think that the Sabbath day should be a day where you don't do housework, where you don't do the ironing, where you don't do the washing. And I know that that seems hard and difficult, and we may not get there straight away. But I think we need to plan for a Sabbath. What a better time than now. Many of us, and this isn't the circumstances we would want to be undertaking this, but this is a fact. Many of us are stuck at home or got to stay in most of the time. We can't do some of those things that keep us that busy. Why not take some time, spend some time with God, reflect on your diary. Don't look at your diary now and say, oh, well, I've got plenty of time. Well, of course you have. You can't go out. Go back to before this started. Look how busy your diaries were. Reflect on what is important and where you're going to create margin. We are going to need to create margin. We need to space in our lives to be human beings. The benefits, I believe, of getting this right will be better mental health, will be better health in general, will be better relationships, will be less stress in our life. We'll be able to ride out some of the bumps of the work life as we go along. We're going to need to take this badge of busyness and throw it away. We need to get rid of it. We need to stop wearing it and saying, look how important I am because I'm so busy. I want you to be able to say, actually, I've got time to do that. Yeah, I've just been resting today, and that's not seen as a bad thing. We as a church, we as followers of Jesus, shouldn't be judgmental or criticizing people who have a day of rest. Before I finish, I want to recommend 2 books to you. I've been reading bits of them this week. One of them I've had for a lot longer than the other. Haven't finished both of the books. I don't tend to finish books. I tend to read bits and flip and flop between various books. The first one is a book by Robert Morris, and it's called Take a Day Off. Can I encourage you? Robert Morris, Take the Day Off. Great book to read, and have a look at that. And then, especially for those maybe that have a leadership role, both in church but also perhaps at work, this book, I read this book, most of it a couple of years ago, and it radically changed my leadership for the better. But it's also got some good sections on taking a Sabbath. And it's called The Emotionally Healthy Leader by Pete Scazzaro. And if you Google either of those guys, Rob Morris is both pastors. Rob Morris leads a church. He's great teaching online. But the Emotionally Healthy Leader, guys, has lots of stuff about becoming a healthy leader, becoming a healthier person, mentally mainly, but talks about emotional intelligence and things like that. Can I encourage you to pick up both